to start. Today, we are going to have a theme, deep dive into social resilience, social well-being. I like this title so much because we have very special guests. Defne Eraslan Öztürk will be joining us. So she came from Germany. Ezgi Berktaş is going to join us from Maya Foundation. Nazlı Avşaroğlu is from Habitat Association. Serra Müderrisoğlu is going to join us from Bogazici University. We have a keynote speaker, Ungar, from Dalhousie University from Canada. So while passing the microphone to each and every one of them, I will be making an introduction for them. I wanted to say good morning to each and every one of you. We have some of the participants who are not originally from Istanbul or who are not living in Turkey. So I would like to leave, first of all, the floor to Ungar. With your permission, I would like to present him in Turkey.
Mr. Professor, it's our pleasure to see you here in Turkey and in MARUF 2023. And let me introduce, first of all, you. It's not easy to summarize for me, but I will try to do my best. Founder and director of the Resilience Research Center at Dalhousie University, and professor also holds their research chair in child, family, and community resilience, and based in Canada. He became the world's leading authority on multi-systematic resilience with publications in high-impact journals, and he is author of over 250 peer reviews, articles, book chapters, and 17 books. Mr. Professor also provides regular consultations to international NGOs, government agencies, educational institutions at all levels of his studies. And his studies, not easy to summarize, as I said, but if I understood well, but we will go into details, indicate that positive developments under stress is best explained by interactions between biological, psychological, social, institutional, and environmental factors. So I think the presentation also will be based on this point of view. So we are ready to listen to you, Mr. Professor. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's obviously a true honor to be invited to Istanbul. It's a great city. It's a city I always talk about too. It's quite amazing. What I'd like to do is just walk you briefly through some of where the field of this idea of social resilience is actually going. My specialization, I work as a clinician, though I defer to the incredible clinicians on our panel. But I'll speak more a little bit about, in general, this idea of what is this idea of resilience. The way the field is currently thinking about resilience is much more about different systems interacting. Let me give you an example from one of our research sites in the world. We're doing some research in a community called Zamdela in South Africa. And one of their responses to help children to get to school and to attend education was they realized that for many children living in incredible poverty, they had to travel from the townships across multiple railway tracks to get to the school. So, of course, this was very dangerous. So what did they do? They, of course, responded to this through a needs assessment at the community level, good basic urban development, and they built a bridge over the railway tracks. It sounds good, except what had happened was the local gangs, the delinquents, the criminals, decided, of course, realized now that all the children would be funneled up and over this bridge every single day. So what they would do is they would wait there and they would rob the children of all their school supplies and clothing and backpacks. And then they would give the children an option to either jump off the bridge or be thrown from the bridge. And of course, the children stopped using the bridge and went back to running across the railway tracks to get to school, which is very dangerous. Now, I bring you that example mostly to kind of make this emphasis that when we begin to think about resilience, such as getting a child to engage in education, or to especially think after a major natural disaster or this type of thing, if we think about only one system, say for instance, getting across a railway track, we tend to forget that fundamentally the story of resilience is much more balanced. It's about making people both rugged, this idea of you can be very rugged and have individual qualities of personal perseverance and grit. Generally speaking, that works well as problems are relatively few. What the science is also saying now is as problems get more complicated or numerous, we also need to be resourced individuals. And in English, this works very well. It has a certain alliteration, to be rugged and to be resourced. So the way my research group defines resilience, and we work all around the world, including I have a scholar right now, Nihal Kuru, who's from here in Turkey, and she's visiting me for a year in Canada. We very much think about resilience as when there is unusual stress. It seems to be our ability to navigate or to make our way to all those social, cultural, physical resources that we require for our well-being. But it's also something about our ability to negotiate or ask for resources to be given to us in ways that we experience as meaningful. So those children, to get to school, didn't just need a bridge. They didn't just need to navigate their way to school. In this pattern of understanding resilience, there was a negotiation to say, we also need a bridge that is safe, more of a social element to the story. So when we are now understanding resilience in this more multi-systemic way, what you're looking at is a figure from a publication in Lancet Psychiatry I co-published with Dr. Linda Theron from South Africa. And what we were trying to pull together in the literature was to say, if you want to understand any particular pattern of resilience, whether at an urban environment, after an earthquake, a refugee's pathway, you're going to have to think about multiple interacting systems. So the biological, the gut bacteria that triggers, and this I defer to my colleagues who are in the more biomedical side of this, who will actually be able to argue that our gut bacteria, our microbiome, has an impact on our immune system, which has a catalytic effect, indeed, on our emotional well-being as well. But there are also psychological systems, how we view, how we attribute the causality of what we've experienced. Do we blame ourselves for the aftermath of an earthquake? Do we blame ourselves if we're a refugee fleeing war? Or do we understand that some of these things are beyond our power to control? There's also, of course, social systems. We know that if you want to improve the well-being of children post-disaster, you put them into institutions like school. You create regular routines. These are the kinds of interventions. So this conversation then grows and grows so that now we are much more sophisticated in how we measure resilience. And of course, there's the built environment, sidewalks, buildings, public spaces, and of course the natural environment, which is a big focus of a conference like this, where obviously climate change is having a trickle-down effect on people's psychological well-being as well as their physical health and their ability to survive. The argument for resilience is if I change any one of those systems, it has a domino effect that tilts the other systems at the same time. You don't just have to change people. You can change a bridge to create engagement in people's minds. And this now is where the science is actually going. And to give you a simple example of this, not so simple, this cost $1 million to do this study, but anyways, we are looking at communities that are dependent on the oil and gas industries in Russia, Canada, South Africa. And what we're trying to understand is what is the stressors in those kinds of communities when the price of oil goes up to $90 a barrel and down to $3 a barrel, et cetera, et cetera. Those dramatic economic changes play out in terms of people's individual psychological functioning, family dynamics about who is in the home and working. So in these studies now of resilience, we are now accounting for many different systems, such as we have measures of personal strengths, peer supports, family supports, physical well-being. But we are also now measuring things like your faith, your attachment to a religious community, or indeed your access to green spaces, blue spaces. We're testing hair cortisol as a biomarker. And we are putting all of that together to basically, well, we come up with a squishy ball. That is our findings. Okay, it's a little more sophisticated than that. It actually looks like these network analyses. But the point is that what we're finding, this is just one little piece of the data. I only have a few minutes here with you, of course. I just want to draw your attention that when we try to figure out which children in a community that is incredibly volatile economically and socially, which children are doing well, we actually looked at something like depression. On the middle scale, you can see that there's a network analysis which is much more diffuse, open, and that is children who showed depression. There's less of a network of factors working together in their lives. And if I might, the one on your far right is actually the children who were resisting depression. And when we actually looked at their relationships to their families, their communities, to their workplaces, to their schools, to their green spaces, to their blue spaces, etc., you can see that it's a much tighter network of associations which are predictive of children being able to withstand depression. So all of this leads me into, if I might, to summarize here a little bit, there are different ways that we approach resilience. Just to be really clear, in this pattern of I navigate and I negotiate for what I need, we are seeing people say, for instance, a group of people will approach resilience after a major disaster or whatever. First strategy is you persist. You go back to doing exactly what you did before. Climate is changing, you don't diversify your economy. You don't go into green technologies. You just persist because, frankly, you can't deal with change. The second strategy, and we've been seeing this, you may have seen the photographs of when the Canadian capital, Ottawa, was overtaken by these trucker convoys who were resisting change. They were largely coming from the same communities that I just spoke about that were going through this economic volatility in the oil and gas industries. I want to see us green our economy. My worry is that there are people being left behind in that just transition, and they are going to resist. And they are going to become a political bombshell that is going to undermine the stability of many societies unless they are part of the green revolution, which is kind of what we see. People will resist. That resistance is one definition of resilience. The most common definition, though, is this idea of bouncing back. It's a shallow, very antiquated, it's 30 years out of date. The science has moved along. We don't just talk about bouncing back. Because if you think about it, I mean, Donald Trump is talking about MAGA. Make America great again? Who is America great for? White, middle-class, heterosexual males. But for them, it's this idea of going backwards. Instead, if you think about it, what we are always trying to do is build back better. We are trying not to recover, we are trying to advance, to integrate the learning from our psychological stress. Our exposure to trauma is also an opportunity to reconsider our lives. Of course, another form of resilience is adaptation. I playfully think of the German company Faber-Castell that has for decades been making pencils, mundane pencils. 10 billion pencils are made every year in the world. We still have pencils, for gosh sakes, after all this technology. And Faber-Castell has managed to survive by adding value to their pencils. That set of pencils you're looking at would cost €300 to buy. That is an adaptation. As silly as example is, we are always seeing societies adapt to the conditions in which they're under. And of course, maybe the best example, what we strive for when we talk about resilience, is a transformation. after a disaster, you don't build back buildings that are going to fall down again in a zone. You don't foolishly build back on the coastline of Florida the houses that were wiped away by the hurricanes. But transformation should be a catalyst for thinking about new ways of showing resilience at multiple systemic levels. I'm inspired by Medellin, Colombia, a place I've worked with, communities I've worked with for some time. When they were thinking about to combat the violence in their community, they were the most violent place on earth around the year 1999. That was where Pablo Escobar and the drug cartels operated. And to counter that violence in their communities, they didn't just employ policing, which is one system. They started thinking about economic and social development, and they built these gondolas to transport people from the favelas, the incredibly poor parts of the city, down the mountainsides into the heart of the city where there are jobs. They also rather creatively built things like libraries and state-of-the-art institutions, not where there was, not in the nicest, most richest parts of the city, but right there in the middle of the communities that were most socially marginalized. And the result was a dramatic decrease over a decade in the level of crime and violence and death and murders in Medellin, Colombia. In fact, it got safe enough where I first went down there, I couldn't go to the communities that I was doing research in. By the time I finished, I could actually take two of my children and stand them in front of one of these libraries in what had been the most dangerous place on earth. So, when you begin to think about all these different systems working together, then we get a much better definition of resilience as navigation and negotiation. A simple example, I currently have a large project with Ukrainian refugees in Canada. Young people who have come under what is called a temporary visa. The research that we're doing is trying to understand what is the impact of having a temporary visa on young people. Do they adopt the language? Do they invest in social relationships? Do they engage in community activities and sporting activities? In other words, a government policy like a visa has a dramatic effect on institutional resilience, the fact that the things given to kids, and then it drifts down to the psychological resilience and ultimately the stress that these children are under. So I encourage you, when thinking about resilience, to design studies which are much more multi-systemic, much more accounting for all the factors that actually make children survive and thrive when they're exposed to adversity, or for that matter, adults as well. And on that note, I'll simply say a huge thank you for this invitation.
Dear Professor, it was a very interesting and inspiring presentation, and we took our notes. I'm sure that there will be also questions to you, but we will finish all our presentations and then I will take some questions. And I think we had a good start by defining and understanding your approach, how you define resilience, because it is the main objective of the MARUF for these 4 days. But what we understand from resilience from our perspective and our academic background is important to understand how we could manage it. So we had a good start with you. Thank you so much.
Efendim şimdi doçent doktor Defne Eraslan Öztürk'e döneceğim. Hocam hoş geldiniz çünkü sizi Almanya'dan davet ettik. Karlsruhe Üniversitesi'nde Klinikum, SRH Klinikum Karlsbad değil mi? Üniversitenin tam olarak ismi. Defne hocamız erişkin psikiyatristi ve bilişsel davranışçı psikoterapisti. Çok uzun yıllar Türkiye'de önemli kurumlarda, üniversitelerde görev yaptıktan sonra hocamız Almanya'ya göç ediyor ve şu anda da Karlsruhe'da akademik hayatına, çalışmalarına devam ediyor. Kadın ruh sağlığı ve toplumun psikiyatri konularında eğitilmesi özel ilgi alanı Defne hocanın. Birçok uluslararası meslek örgütü örgütünde de oldukça aktif olduğunu görüyoruz. Avrupa Psikiyatri Asistanları Federasyonu'nun başkanlığını yapmış. Şu anda da Avrupa Psikiyatri Birliği'nin eğitim komisyonunda hem online eğitimler veriyor hem de genç psikiyatristlere yönelik programlardan sorumlu. Defne Hocam muhtemelen bize dayanıklılık üzerine yine bir değerlendirmede bulunacak. Hatta benimle önceden slaytlarını paylaşmıştı. İlk sorusu da çok heyecan verici. Bazılarımız bunu nasıl becerebiliyor? Hani ben daha halk diliyle özetleyeyim. Ve bazılarımız neden daha az dayanıklı? Ve tabii ki yine sizin aslında dayanıklılık tanımınızla ve bakış açınızla siz de dinleyelim hocam. Buyurun lütfen.
Çok teşekkür ederim. Burada olmak çok güzel ama bu konuşmanın içinde de ben zihnimin açıldığını hissediyorum. Daha da öyle devam edeceğinden çok eminim. Evet, Nihal Hocam'ın da söylediği gibi ben Karlsruhe Üniversitesi'nde değilim aslında. Bir araştırma, Heidelberg Üniversitesi'nin bir araştırma hastanesinde doktor olarak çalışıyorum. Almanya'da akademisyen değilim. Bugün Merve Hanım'a bizimle ilk bağlantı kuran orada. Sordum bana nasıl ulaştınız, neden beni çağırdınız buraya diye. O da dedi ki sizi tanıyorum işte genel toplum için yaptığınız eğitimlerden dedi. Gerçekten benim çeşitli konularda, psikiyatriyle ilgili konularda online eğitimlerim var. Sonuncusu da işte posttraumatik stres bozukluğu ve yasla ilgili. Ve ben de bu sunumu birazcık aslında dinleyicilerin psikiyatri ve psikoloji dışı branşlardan olacağını düşünerek biz psikiyatristler olarak, özellikle erişkin psikiyatristleri olarak, sonra Serra Hoca daha çocuk konularına daha çok eğilecek. Biz nasıl görüyoruz bu konuyu diye bir genel bilgi vermek üzere düzenledim. Yani benim genel ilgi alanım psikiyatri dışı insanlara psikiyatriyi anlatmaya uyuyor aslında. Dayanıklılığın farklı boyutları ile ilgili kendi özel hayatımda ilk düşündüğüm zaman bizim aslında Almanya'ya göç ettiğimiz dönemdi. Bu bizim aile fotoğrafımız Heidelberg'te. Burada kızım Lidya, büyük kızım Lidya 9 yaşında, küçüğü 3 yaşında, şu anda 4 yaşında daha doğrusu. Bugün 10 yaşına giriyor küçüğü. Lidya 9 yaşındaydı Almanya'ya geldiğimizde ve büyük bir büyük bir bizi işte bir savaş gibi bizi zorlayan bir sebep olmadan gelmiştik. Ama Lidya çok zorlandı. Depresyona girdi çünkü orada işte Alman çocukları İngilizce konuşmuyor, o Almanca konuşamıyor ve ben ona kötü bir şey yaptığımı bir anne olarak çok düşündüm. Sonra birisi bana şunu dedi. Ya dedi, evet dedi, şu anda strese sokuyorsun ama belki de onu ileride karşılaşabileceği zorluklarla ilgili güçlendiriyorsun. Çünkü şu anda senin yanında ailesinin desteğiyle bir zorluk yaşıyor hayatında ve bununla baş etmeyi öğreniyor. Çünkü Türkiye'de biliyoruz ki çocukların hayatı oldukça rahat olabiliyor. Ve bu benim aslında dayanıklılığın her zaman çocuğa destek olmakla değil, çocukları zorlukların içinde de bırakmakla, destekle ilgili olduğunu düşünmeme sebep olan olaylardan bir tanesi. Lidya şimdi işte 15 yaşında ve Almanya'ya gelmiş olmaktan çok mutlu. Profesör Ungar Resilience'ın tanımlarından bahsetti. Gerçekten çok farklı tanımları var. En klasiği bu bouncing back denilen, yani zorluklar karşısında tekrar geri dönme. Ama aslında zorlukların karşısında, travmanın karşısında iyi uyum sağlamak diye geçiyor. Ama bu bence de çok basit bir tanım. Çünkü burada neyden bahsettiğimizi bir daha düşünmemiz lazım. Mikro travmalar mı şimdi makro?
Are we talking about micro traumas or macro traumas? The macro traumas are earthquakes, COVID, wars, big accidents. These happen frequently in life, but other than that, there are some daily life traumas. You know, as an immigrant, you may have some minor social traumas, or there might be simple traumas in daily life, like that can challenge you, and you need to be more resilient. And some people are more resilient and some are less resilient in the face of such traumas. Generally, resilience is your adaptation power after you face a difficulty. That's how it's generally thought about. So it's somewhat looked at from the perspective of post-traumatic stress disorder in adult psychiatry literature. But what is resilience? Is it a trait of someone's temperament that is revealed after a trauma? Or when it comes to trauma or challenges, is it how you process the trauma? Or after you face a trauma, you experience some results. So is it those results? And you have to evaluate those results as well. Let's say somebody experiences a trauma and they experience this post-traumatic stress disorder. They constantly remember the trauma, they withdraw themselves from lives, they become dysfunctional in certain areas of life. But at the same time, despite the post-traumatic stress disorder, despite this major trauma, they continue with their lives. So if we just look at the outcome, if we look at resilience as an outcome, is this person successful or not? Yes, this person had post-traumatic stress disorder. From that perspective, it's not successful. But despite the trauma in certain aspects of their lives, there is this normal functioning, or perhaps something that is close to the previous functional level. Or compared to other people, there is this average life that this person can maintain. So in that regard, this person is successful. So resilience is not just there or not there, or it's not just those who fail or succeed after trauma. You cannot easily categorize those things. What I like most is that resilience can have different levels of achievement in different aspects of life. It's a continuum across multiple domains of life, like Professor Michael Ungar also mentioned. Maybe until recently, there were a lot of studies on resilience, mainly focusing on trauma and the post-traumatic period. And there is a more important question here. We actually underwent a huge trauma in Turkey recently, and that was the reason why I gave this online training. We had very tragic events, and we know that in Ukraine and 6-7 years ago in Syria, there were other events. So all across the world, there are major traumas, and people go through these losses, they experience this tragedy, and interestingly enough, we should not just ask why we have this trauma, but we should be asking, why do most people cope so well? We think about the challenges in Colombia, the children there. One way or another, these people cope with these challenges. How can they do this? So this becomes the focus of the topic on resilience more and more. So what are the determinants of psychological resilience? This was talked about partly. Of course, there are some biological factors. Our body has a stress response system, and in some people, genetically, this stress response system may have developed more sensitively, or maybe during childhood, this stress response system may start to respond differently as a result of certain traumas, or they may be more prone to depression. Some people may be more prone to obsessive disorders. So biological factors are mainly about the genetic factors. Part of it is from our families. These are things that we receive through our genes. Biological factors are of course very important, but they're not the sole determinants. And we have to think of another aspect. For instance, some biological factors may make you prone to anxiety, and from an evolutionary perspective, they may be adaptive mechanisms. Another thing is childhood experiences. We have to talk about trauma. We say that which doesn't kill you strengthens you, but it's not the case for childhood trauma. There may be a good caregiver, and that helps the child to be more resilient, but it depends on which period of childhood we're talking about. Perhaps in early childhood, a protective mother can make you more resilient, but maybe it may not have the same effect during adulthood. And I hope that by going to Germany, I allow this little trauma for my children by going to Germany, and I hope that they will succeed with that. So it's important to allow those little traumas. So what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Is it really the case? I think this creates a lot of pressure on a lot of people. When you can't get out of trauma strongly, you feel like a failure. I see this with my, patients. People learn new things after trauma. They derive new meaning, but it doesn't mean that they will always come out of it stronger. So there are those people who don't come out of the trauma stronger, and you cannot call them non-resilient. I think this creates a lot of pressure on people, and it's unfair. And there are cultural factors. For example, we talk about the Afghan culture. There are challenges there. Accepting the difficulty and preserving hope are issues that are being discussed. But of course, it depends on the type of trauma. Like you mentioned, there might be minor traumas where you are in a safer culture. Perhaps there can be more hope and acceptance. Like in our country, we have a saying, there is good in everything. There is good in everything that happens to you. That actually helps you go on. But, if you just have this approach where you tie everything to fate and destiny, you don't take measures, and it makes things difficult. Personality traits are also very important. Emotional regulation is one important aspect, because one of the most important aspects of resilience is going on despite of difficulty, and this requires you to accept your feelings until a certain point. This feeling of autonomy, or trying something new when you're faced with challenges, and being motivated by that, and accepting that there will be difficulty. I think I talked more than I imagined, so I go quickly. Of course, there are situations where resilience can be supported. One is acceptance for people and societies. Accepting that trauma and difficulties are part of our lives, just like it was the case with the earthquake, so that we can prepare for it. And you mentioned something, and I think that this is the theme of this whole forum. Resilience is not just an individual thing. It doesn't just belong to the individual. Before the trauma, you have to strengthen the resilience of that individual. So before traumas, you have to make sure that there is a system where people can be raised strongly. And after the trauma, you have to ensure this individual is safe. So it's very important in maintaining this resilience. I think this whole forum is about that. And most importantly, in my individual therapies, I observe this, especially for ourselves, for our children, for systems, for structures. The most important trait we have to have is flexibility. Like Professor Ungar said, adaptation is a very important stage, let me say, of resilience. Adaptation is a very important stage of resilience, and this really needs to be the focus in therapy. And an Israeli author has great work on trauma, and this author has a saying about resilience. I think this is very important. resilience is the decision to keep moving forward despite the difficulty. You know, like an addict tries to stay sober every day, and resilience is the decision to keep moving forward despite the difficulty. But as a society and as systems, we should facilitate that process. During the earthquake, there were children who kept on going to school. I think this photo explains it very well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was a very important perspective that you put forth. And we have to increase resilience before the trauma takes place. When I think about our geography, I think that we generally start taking measures after something happens. We receive therapy only after the trauma happens, and sometimes we even ignore that. But maybe we should be proactive, you know, like getting trainings, knowing yourself, knowing the society. Maybe after you become parents, you can get therapy and some support. We don't have cultural habits in that direction, but I think we have to change those habits. And I took a note. If a trauma happens to you, rather than focusing on why did it happen to me, you should focus on how to solve it. And maybe you should just see how you try to solve it, and you should accept it if you fail. I mean, we are just human beings. We should just keep going on, and maybe we will succeed the next time. Maybe we need to have self-compassion in a way. I want to turn to Serra Müderrisoğlu. She completed her doctoral degree in Boston University, and she completed her postdoctoral studies in Cambridge University. Then she started as a full-time faculty at Bogazici University. Throughout her career, she worked at Bogazici University for 20 years. She especially worked with children that live in harsh conditions. She worked on their psychosocial development. Of course, there are several NGOs that work in the field. She collaborated with them. She carried out projects with them. In fact, for volunteers that participate in these NGOs, she supported their integration, and she also is part of the team that works on the ethical guideline of the Turkish Psychological Association. She just retired recently, so we wish you good luck in your new life. But I think you can't retire from being an academic, right? You just don't have the institutional ties anymore, but you're going to continue your work in an independent fashion, I assume. Well, we're going to talk about resilience on from a child's development perspective. Thank you very much. Today I'm not talking to you as an academician, but as a clinical psychologist. I was in Bogazici University for very long years. I worked on different topics like child poverty, and also chronic poverty, domestic migration, internal migration, especially in 1990s. There were these children who worked on the streets. They were selling Kleenex on the streets, and we had this volunteer project with those children, and we had some experience with this project. And based on this experience, we started to observe the lives of those children and families, their ups and downs, how they try to exist despite those conditions. I started to see the picture. It was very unique, of course, but at the same time, in a way, it was universal. Like Dr. Ungar mentioned, relations and connections, being able to use those, being able to use the resources. We saw these great stories of development by making use of these resources. I worked with this multidisciplinary team. We worked on this concept of well-being of children. And we created that term, well-being, in Turkish. It's not just welfare, it's beyond that. And we saw that it was a very complex topic, this concept of well-being and also resilience. So I would like to continue from where Dr. Ungar left, the doctor, he gave the bigger picture, the systemic situation, and Defne Hanım looked at it from an individual perspective. So I'd like to go to an even, more micro level, like under the water and inside the body. Let me put it that way, are unknown aspects. Yes, we exist with our body, but we are not really aware of what goes on inside our body. I would like to talk about our autonomic condition, because when we are not in touch with our body, we don't really know what triggers us. First, I invite you to look at this photo. What happens in your body when you look at this photo? I see smiling faces, maybe an increase of warmth. Actually, I'm not going to talk about biology. I just want to talk about two basic conditions. One is this relationship where we feel the sense of safety. This is our strongest and most regulated existence. Maybe you don't like the word regulation so much, but it's very important, because during the day or at other times we have our ups and downs. I will talk about that soon.
So it is preferable to have tolerable intervals. These intervals would pave the way for resilience. So in that state, in our cognitive, emotional, and affective processes can work in the best state possible, because we can make use of our capacity to the most. That's not how we are all the time. Sometimes, due to the incidents that we are going through, would scare us, and they would make us ask those questions to ourselves. Will I be able to survive? These can be some financial crises. Maybe there is not all the time an animal which is trying to eat us up, but there might be some challenges, like financial challenges, or some traumatic incidents can happen, such as earthquakes, etc. If we are in that very state, and this is what you can see during the traffic jam, because all of a sudden, you have to be on time for a meeting, and let's assume that you don't have any parking space to park your car, and you notice the fact that you're going to run late for the meeting. So in our autonomic nervous system, certain things would jump up. And it is very much dependent on how we would calm ourselves down, how we would regulate ourselves. And this is a very important capability, as Defne has just mentioned earlier on. And she talked about how we can be more resilient even before the occurrence of the incidents to take place. So I don't want to trigger your brain any further. Let me keep this slide on so that we would feel more balanced. So there's an important thing to take into consideration. If we do not know how regulated we are inside our body, our capabilities to manage our behaviors or the reactions that we would give would decrease. So, as I mentioned in that very example, let's assume that we have less traffic jam, and you see this relaxation, just like it is the case for picture number 1, you have this calmness if there's no traffic jam. But there are some plateaus and peaks during the day, and these plateaus and peaks are in a tolerable interval, and these are the trauma reactions. So if we would go beyond the regulation interval, our nervous system, we have to recognize what happens to our body, because most of the time we can be excessively stimulated and we might be caught up, and we cannot come back to what we were, and hypervigilance might be the state of hyperstimulation, and the sleep disorders can take place, and sometimes you might have nightmares when you go to sleep, and this is what you would experience if you, this would be what you would experience, what you would be through, and the reaction of being frozen after a peak. In order for the body to protect itself, actually this is something evolutionary, your body freezes itself. It goes introvert. And without knowing how to regulate it, you cannot work with the trauma. For the last 20 to 25 years, trauma studies are more sensory motor basis. So you have to understand the projections on bodily, in bodily sense, so you can cover the distance if you would understand this. So basically, trauma is not the incident itself. The trauma is what is the set of reactions showed by, exhibited by the person who has been through trauma. And this is not a character trait. This is the trait developed as a result of the nervous system. Of course, everybody has different nervous systems because we're coming from different backgrounds, but this is a very important point to remember. Secondly, what's trauma is not what is happening at that very moment. Trauma is also what's not happening at that very moment. So if there are no people around us to show some compassion, so we are away from solution, and this creates a space where there is no solution. The lack of something, lack of compassion, can deepen trauma. And body works differently, different from mind. And the nervous system, if the nervous system cannot balance itself with frequent stimulations, the body cannot bounce back by saying that, okay, now I'm safe, I can go back to what I was. So it is very important to teach body how to regulate itself. For children and for infants, after showing a general picture, I would like to precede the items, the bullet points for children and infants. And they're at a very sensitive point because in order, their capacity to regulate themselves is very limited compared to the adults. And they look up to the adults. After an incident like earthquake, the nervous system of their parents are very determined, and their state, their mood state, can be secondary trauma for their children. And this is why the first thing that we would recourse to is the attempt to find the balance, and we have to be equipped with the mechanisms to be able to do that. So as I mentioned earlier on, I gave you this example of traffic jam, and you can cope with the minor stress factors caused by traffic jam. But if you would remember the earthquake experience, by the way, as Dr. Ungar said, that environment and then context would give us some different stimuli. And are they inviting us for trust, or are they inviting us towards the lack of trust? And this can deepen our experience, and being in that chaotic state would deepen what we have been through. And lastly, nervous system. If the nervous system is excessively stimulated, or if it's frozen, the safe zones, the resources around us cannot be perceived by us, and we cannot feel them, we cannot make use of them. In order for us to make use of the resources around us, we have to be at a certain regulatory state, and co-regulation can make this possible. Two persons or more than two persons can make this happen. So leaving one, because persons can find it very difficult to regulate themselves. There's no shame in it. You don't have to blame yourself. So there may be people who would show compassion to us, who would help us during this trauma, are the ones who we need the most, and we need to restructure them around us. So instead of restructuring the buildings, we have to restructure those relationships around us so that the families, elderly people, and the children, and all of the individuals in the society, if they would experience a disaster, they would find an antidote for themselves. So they would have the capability to find totally the opposite. Sometimes it's about capability to smile, to laugh. I know that those who have come from the disaster zones would know it, and there are some volunteers who dress up like a clown, and you would ask this question to yourself, I mean, why are there clowns around us? And you're trying to create this zone of comfort, a zone of smiling, and this is why that's what we do in Adıyaman, and I'm providing my support to those who work there. I joined an activity offered by an association at the center and at the villages. We have created some art activities, and we molded the clay. We have carried out some physical activities. With the activation, we elevated their mood, and we have found calmness after this activity. So trauma-informed activities are the methods which we call as such, and it's very important to make use of them. I just try to show those pictures without exposing the faces of children. So you need to create a space for them to breathe thanks to the social areas, social spaces, so that they would come together, they would find togetherness, they would feel solidarity in such a way to create a meaning for themselves. So while carrying out this activity, I took this photo. We were in a courtyard of a mosque, and a person came, his son or daughter was there, and he said that you should create a space for us too, for the elderly too. We have the need to speak out. Maybe we can carry out some drama activities. And I exceeded my time, by the way. Thank you very much for your attention, for listening to me. That's what I wanted to share with you. Distinguished Professor, thank you very much. Actually, we had the opportunity to discuss about a certain group of people. Yes, children are very important, and we have understood the fact that this is not a struggle that can be achieved all by yourself or your periphery. The people around you are also very important to be supported. So this is what we keep hearing, and thanks to your remarks, this is what we have confirmed. And you should allow for some time to go through trauma. So I believe that there's an ideal period of time before going into deep depression. There is an optimum time, and with the help of the experts, with the people around you, you can be assisted so that your concentration can be driven towards a different direction so that you would improve. You have left it at the very optimum point so that the next speaker can pick up from where you left off. And we have listened to very important professors, we have listened to medical doctors, and they were quite on time. I forgot the fact that I am moderator. I'm very much carried away with their speeches. I'm so glad that that's how it happened for me. So we have two valuable associations with us, and we want to understand what they are doing. And they have also worked on two devastating earthquakes that we have experienced, and Professor said that we should not forget about the elderly. And Nazlı is from Habitat Association, so she was responsible for disaster area community centers, and we have asked her to kindly touch upon the activities that they carry out. So the young people are forgotten in a way in inverted commas, or maybe the more the groups which have disadvantages were more concentrated on. But I will leave the floor to her to so that she would explain what they are doing. She has a degree from Bosphorus University. She has worked in UNICEF and UNHCR, and she worked in MENA region, so she has quite a lot of experience. You know Habitat so well, and they worked on social impact projects for developmental purposes, especially in the post-earthquake phase. They have provided their kind input in improving the situation, and I'm sure that she's going to inform us. They have a recent activity that they carried out, and they have found out the fact that the young people who are happy with their life is 45% by percentage according to their study. So there's a regression in the ratio of young people who are satisfied with their life. So you have the floor. Can I be technically supported? Can somebody move my slides forward without hitting this button? So it's mostly, you have photographs, right? There's almost no text in my presentation. Thank you very much. Professor Serra has left at a very optimum point for me, so I took some classes from her. I'm very happy to share the platform with her. So I would like to show you how it is expressed in implementation. So I am going to elaborate on how well-being is handled in practice. So as Habitat Association, our association, by the way, was established in 1997. It was back in 1996 when Habitat Summit took place in Istanbul. And 1 year after we have established our association, we have been carrying out projects to develop capacity. We're concentrating on creating a social impact in such a way to have a harmonious world digitally for special groups like disadvantaged groups, and we have visited towns and villages. So for 30 years we're working in the field. We are working for the people with disabilities, elderly people, and young people. As Professor Nihal said earlier on, as an association we were established for young people, but our main focus is development. We're implementing developmental projects, and since 2017 we have an activity that we carry out, and with Infacto, together with Professor Emre Erdoğan, I'm sure Professor Serra knows him so well, and Professor Emre was my professor too. Every year we carry out an activity. We are preparing a report on the well-being of young people. We are concentrating on youth, thanks to the inputs of Professor Emre, and we are making use of different indicators to understand the preferences, the tendencies, the expectations of the youth in Turkey. And this is prepared in the form of a report. We are studying the financial state, their participation to civil society, political activities, and these are the benchmarks that we take into consideration, and we have published the report in April, right after the earthquake. And in Turkey, I would like to touch upon the method very shortly. In Turkey, in 28 cities, approximately 1,200 young people were interviewed with, and we have the sampling, and 51% of the samples were male and 48% were female. We wanted to measure the level of satisfaction on the side of youth, and we have noticed the fact that they have zero hopes. And 71 was the percentage of their satisfaction level, but unfortunately this has dropped down to 45%, and unfortunately there's a huge drop. So it shows the fact that young people are so disadvantaged in Turkey. Even before the occurrence of the earthquake, this is what we were shown. Actually, the biggest problem for the youth is inflation and the financial difficulties as a result of wrong financial and fiscal policies. Unfortunately, 63% of the youth are living below the poverty level. Unfortunately, unemployment is another problem for the young people. Only 30% of the job seekers are happy with what they are. And this is what we have prepared as a report together with Professor Emre, and all of the interviewees emphasize the fact that they have difficulties in finding jobs. They said that there are not enough employment opportunities and the level of wages is so low. Unfortunately, youth have internalized nepotism in Turkey. Unfortunately, volunteerism was also studied, and we have quite many volunteers, and we have more than 7,000 volunteers, and 9,000 volunteers from our association worked in the earthquake zone, and only 9% of the youth are working as a volunteer in a non-governmental organization. Actually, the picture is very simple. Young people do not have time to develop themselves, and they are not economically capable to develop themselves. We asked them why they are not a part of volunteerism, and 50% said that I don't have enough time for volunteerism. And after the earthquake, we have prepared this report right after the earthquake, and we have asked if they have any people around them who lost their lives. And 1/4 of the young people have their loved ones, and most of them have passed away during the earthquake. And when they wake up in the morning, when they go to the office, I'm sure that the first meeting that they joined was on what they can do after earthquakes. And since there's no disaster planning in Turkey, nobody knew what they could do, and all of the non-governmental organizations, local administrations, universities did not know what they would do, and they worked as their humanitarian organizations.
And as Habitat, that's what we did as well. But actually, what we did mostly was, I don't have enough time to explain, but we wanted to have these projects for development, shelter, early recovery. We're very active with such projects in the earthquake region. We're active by building common working areas. We work in 3 provinces, Kahramanmaraş, Adıyaman, Hatay, and Malatya. Actually, that makes 4. And we want to bring back employment and economy to the regions, and we want to bring the people back to the region because they went to other cities, so we want to ensure the region develops again. So we have this capacity building trainings in these centers, and it is like a local development hub that will allow collaboration. We do this with the private sector like Sabancı Holding, with Hatay Metropolitan Municipality, and other local governments. What we want to achieve here is universities in the morning, but for young people, they were more conscious, they were more aware, and they had no expectations for the future, for life any longer, and it was very harsh weather. They closed them in their containers, or they had left that region. So we thought about what to do. As Habitat, we have very strong ties with local governments, and we work with Turkey Union of Chambers and stock exchanges, and we work with other metropolitan municipalities. So we made a call. All local governments have their social spaces and camp spaces. They should open up those spaces to young people because young people need this kind of space. And indeed, I think this was one of the major activities for youth. 4 times throughout the summer, and my friend who is in charge of the summer camps is here. We held summer camps for youth. Antalya Metropolitan Municipality, Hatay and İzmir Metropolitan Municipality, Buca and Seyhan municipalities supported us. So from Kahramanmaraş, from Hatay, from Adıyaman, we got youth from those regions, and for a whole week, well, until now we reached 150 young people. We said we're going to have these awareness workshops, we're going to have training to increase the resilience capacity, and we're going to have fun activities, because as much as children, young people need to laugh as well. You know, in the earthquake zone, in the beginning, when they started to laugh, they just realized, wait a minute, we're in the earthquake zone, maybe we shouldn't laugh. There were such dialogues, and we noticed during the summer camps that young people were able to say, do you remember we were just leaving the building and the building was going to collapse? How did we ever leave this building? So they started to talk. They started to have these dialogues. Over time, perhaps, you know, this adaptation, I am learning the literature from you, so it started to make sense to me, and perhaps they just adapted themselves to this situation, and they're actually, in the beginning, when they talked, they were crying, and now they can actually smile when they are talking about these things. They say, well, we experienced this, but I hope you don't really experience this. Yes, we're laughing right now, but it was horrible. They can say this. Sorry, I took longer, 3 minutes longer than my time. Thank you very much. The previous speakers focused on the well-being concept, and that it's not possible on an individual basis. It needs to be supported by environmental factors, and we saw this through the field practices. So it's important to do field research, find out the problems, find out the reasons for unhappiness, and developing a project on that basis, I think, is a good example. Our panelists said hopelessness and anxiety, those two things make people unhappy, and it can be devastating. So for finding a job is one thing. I think Habitat has done very important work. I want to turn to Ezgi, the final speaker. I want to thank you for your patience, but I'm sure you listened to all of this with great interest. She's from Maya Foundation. She had studied at Middle East Technical University in the sociology department, and she also had a degree in Hacettepe University in the field of demographics, and she's currently a doctoral student in the field of demographics, and since 2017 she's been working in child protection and psychological support. She is part of several national and international NGOs. She's a good activist, and today she's here as the programs coordinator of Maya Foundation. She's going to talk about what Maya Foundation does to increase social resilience. Welcome again. Hi everyone. I'm very happy to be here today. I've been working in this field for very long years, particularly with children, to improve the social resilience and well-being of children. We carry out work as Maya Foundation, and personally I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the presentations. I learned a lot. I took a lot of notes. Well, today as Maya Foundation, what do we do? That's what I'd like to talk about. I will talk about our programs in general, and then, about what we did after Maraş earthquake. That's what I'd like to focus on, because I believe this is what everybody is curious about, because it was both, at individual level and social level, it was a big trauma, and the impact is still going on. What do we do in our foundation? That's what I'd like to talk about. We were established in 2015. safe. We actually dreamt about a community with free and safe children, and we cover children from 5 to 24 years of age, children and youth. We want them to reach their true potential, and we want to assist them in that direction. We want to improve their quality of life. Actually, we focus on 5 to 24-year-olds, but like the professor said, there can be macro traumas, wars, migration, natural disasters, pandemic, or micro traumas like the family's disintegration, parent loss. So there are disadvantaged and vulnerable youth and children who have undergone such difficulties. That's our area of focus, and we want to improve their physical and intellectual well-being and increase their social resilience. I will briefly talk about what we did soon, but who do we do this with? We do this with other people. We have youth in our focus, but they have their caregivers, their teachers, in fact, institutions that they are interacting with. So we have a holistic approach. We try to exhibit a holistic approach because, like Professor Michael said, resilience is actually a lot of systems interacting with one another. It is possible through well-functioning of several systems working together. So as Maya Foundation, yes, we have children and youth in our focus, but then there are the social workers who work with them, the families, volunteers. We also work with volunteers in our foundation. We have schools, NGOs, public institutions, teachers, and school counselors. So we work very closely with those parties. Well, basically, we have 4 main programs. One is psychological support and child protection program. They generally go hand in hand because psychological health and psychosocial support is for those vulnerable children, so there are generally child protection risks involved. We have education program, capacity building, disasters, and emergency health program. So under our mental health and psychosocial support program, we support children, youth, and the caregivers that they're interacting with. They may have had past difficulties or challenges in everyday life, so we try to support them through our work. Well, mainly we have group sessions. I will talk about our approach in these group sessions. Let's say a young person or a child needs some more support. We may notice this during the group sessions. So during COVID, of course, we had the online sessions. We can have online or face-to-face individual sessions with them. Of course, we want to improve the trauma-focused capacity of parents, so we have positive parenting sessions. And of course, we have refugees and local groups in our focus, so social cohesion is important in resilience, and that's why we have the social cohesion sessions. And under child protection, we have individual protection assistance, information about access to their rights, information sessions about trauma, prevention, and guidance sessions. As Maya Foundation, we have developed a method that is unique to us in the world. We call this Project Lift method. In fact, there are some psychological well-being skills that we're familiar with, and that's what we try to develop here, because the path to being resilient is about having some skills in your toolkit. So when you have some challenging experiences, you can put those skills to use. Being prepared is the first target, but sometimes we may not be prepared. So after a traumatic event, right after psychological first aid, you can implement some psychological skills before a formal treatment maybe. So on the left you see 6 skills. Identifying and prioritizing one's own needs, building problem-solving skills, promoting positive activities, managing reactions, regulating, promoting self-help thinking, and of course, rebuilding healthy social ties. So how do we focus on these skills? Through creative art therapy methods. We use a lot of music, photos, dance, movement, storytelling, manual skills, and handcraft, film. So we use such techniques to develop those skills. I think I should speed up. So in the field of education, particularly in the field of trauma, it's important to be prepared beforehand to increase resilience, both on the individual and social levels. So we have this project, Trauma Sensitive Schools. We work with the students and parents and teachers to make them more sensitive towards trauma, and if somebody some children may have had a traumatic experience but they may not have processed it, so we have individual sessions so that this kid can recover and can advance at the same time. So we have this trauma sensitive program, and in 2021 we got an award in the World Innovation Summit for education. We're very proud of this program. And the people who offer services to the disadvantaged groups, we want to build some we organize this capacity building training. We have some basic training like for psychological first aid, and we have more specialized trainings at the same time. We started that in 2017. We have these people working in different ministries, different NGOs, so we deliver trainings to those people. And there is the secondary trauma. How can we prevent the secondary trauma? How can we preserve our self-well-being? We also talk about those. Finally, I want to talk about disasters and emergencies. What do we do here? I will talk about that soon. In fact, we have had this program in place for a very long time. We first started in 2020 Elazığ earthquake. Then in 2020 we had these trainings in Izmir because of COVID. We had online and group sessions for those people who experienced the earthquake. We went to the field, Elazığ and Izmir. And after the wildfires in Muğla, we had the psychological first aid sessions and group sessions. And finally, in 2023, after the earthquake, we did some work. Right after the 6th of February, in a few weeks, we created a team of experts. In Maya Foundation, we have trauma-based psychosocial support. So 80% of our staff is psychologists and 60% are clinical psychologists, and the rest are social workers. We organized very quickly. In a few weeks, we made a call to our volunteers. We have a huge network of volunteers. We went to the field, and what did we do during the acute interventions? We were in Hatay, Maraş, and Urfa with our teams. We held psychological first aid for children and adults. And of course, we had this emergency child protection services. We did work to guide the children to the right places.
We've carried out PSS sessions, and what's more important is that together with the ones we worked at the field, since the field of earthquake was quite big and everyone was in the field and the conditions were quite challenging, and our co-workers carried out some secondary trauma sessions, and we discussed on how we can overcome the situation. And the parents were in a traumatic situation and they were having difficulties in establishing communication with their children. And as we say, there were individuals, there were trauma-informed individuals who were trying to find their ways to establish their connection with their children. So 6 months passed, and this month is month 7 after the occurrence of the earthquake, and especially in the affected provinces, physical needs are still present. I came from Hatay last evening. I was in the field, and mental health and their psychosocial needs are still challenged, and they still have those needs. And specifically, if I am to specifically speak for Hatay in Antakya, Samanda, lots of NGOs are still working there. They have better organization, but in the remote villages where the refugees are located in formal camps, and there are some informal settlement areas, and after 7 months, even after month 7, there is no psychosocial professional. And at the midterm, as Maya Foundation, our main target is to continue psychosocial support in order to create the well-being, the state of well-being. And of course, we will continue to work with the parents in such a way to increase the capacity of the organizations and institutions which are working in this particular field. And we keep saying that it's a fact that psychosocial support is so much needed, and those who are working in this field are so much needed, and we have to find our way to see what we can do in the process of recovery. So, of course, there are long, long years ahead of us to work. And while concentrating on physical improvements, physical recovery, livelihood, the access to livelihood opportunities should also be supported. This is what we keep saying, because it's a very important aspect of being resilient. And mental health and psychosocial support should coexist, and it's very important to have this simultaneity, because if you're not psychologically good, you cannot be a part of the daily life. If we would not show enough care for those children, of course, the academic year started, their learning can also be challenged. Of course, schools are safe areas, but it would not become that much possible for them to benefit from the opportunities to be offered by the schools. And the community should show solidarity so that social solidarity would be strengthened. So in the long run, mental health and psychosocial support should be appreciated, and it should be emphasized in a better way. Please excuse me for taking much longer time. Feel free to connect or contact us through those channels. Ezgi, thank you very much. You have given very important, very significant examples, but the message in your closing remarks made me remember one thing. During my stay in France, there was a huge fire next to our building where I was living, excuse me. But the fire was under control after a very short period of time. We were all out, and the response teams were there, and we were taken to a gymnasium hall, and all of the residents were accommodated there. And this whole process took an hour, and the fire was under control. Nobody was hurt. And during our stay in gymnasium, psychologists and the municipal authorities came to where we were, and they had our sessions with us. As a courageous Turk, I said that nothing bad can happen to us, and that's what I was actually observing during my stay in the gymnasium hall. This cannot be postponed. Of course, the emergency teams would come and to take care of the physical challenges, but of course, simultaneously, psychologists should also be present in a very short period of time so that we would be psychologically supported. And this is what we have learned as a lesson as a result of the earthquake that took place in Hatay. Of course, after 7 months, of course, fundamental and physical assistance is very important, but psychosocial and mental health, psychosocial assistance and mental health are also very important. And it's very nice for us to have the non-governmental organizations like yours. This is the end of our session. I'm sure that you have many questions in your mind. I have tens of questions in my mind as a moderator. So I would like to ask for the translators to wait for another 10 minutes so that we would give the microphone to the members of the audience to ask their questions. Please introduce yourself first and then ask your question afterwards. Please bear with us for 10 more minutes. This is a request from me to the hall and to the translators. Thank you very much. I am working in the field of migration and refugees, and I have worked on the Turkish people living in Europe, and now I'm working on refugees, and I have worked with most of the panelists, and I have organic ties with my foundation. I have a more critical question. Of course, there's this individual well-being, state of well-being, and community-based state of well-being, but there might be some larger challenges, bigger challenges. For example, the refugees in Turkey is an example that we give according to our latest research. The schooling, we have asked the question to the Turkish people on the schooling of the Syrian people, and 75% of the respondents said that Syrian children should not go to the schools. And can you imagine, those people would characterize themselves as compassionate people, and after this experience, they have this hostility, they have this bad feeling coming out of themselves. And we are working with the refugees in order to understand their situation. But there's this pressure inside the hosting community. There's this malignancy inside the host community, or maybe this is because of their prejudices, this is because of their perception, and this is what we were experiencing in the earthquake zone. After the occurrence of the first earthquake, the tents were erected and the Turkish people and Syrian people coexisted. This lasted one day. The next day, they were separated. Were they all bad people? They did not have any conscience? No, we know that they were conscious people. They were not bad people. And the Syrians were escaping with small boats. And I remember this man holding his children, small children, and we were asking, this is very irresponsive. How can you challenge the situation of child? But the man says that I took a risk, but I saved the life of the children, of the child that I'm holding. Anyways, let me get back to what I was asking. Feel free to answer my question. This is not a specific question to a specific member of the platform. If these societal problems cannot be managed well, the individual well-being would regress individually, and we would take a totally different direction as a society. And people become racist naturally, and they're not interested in bad experiences of other people. They become irresponsive, and what would you say to that? Let me receive another question from the hall, and let's close the session, and let's answer all of the questions all together. I'm so glad to see Merve from MARUF. It's always good for me to see her, because when she enters into Bud, I felt very disturbed with her presence, because whenever she enters the room, this means that we have to close the session. There's another question, and let's receive your question first, and then let's receive the answers. My name is Eraslan. I'm working at Habitat Association. I would like to thank the inputs of yours. Well, thank you very much for offering this network for us. I know you from international relations. I am following up what you do at my association. I asked I just look back to the audience to see who asked the question. I know the gentleman so well. I have a question for Professor Serra. She talked about youth camps, and I know that there are some workshops, and we were also configuring the workshops for them too. And we were trying to understand the situation of the earthquake victims, and we knew that they were very much affected by the earthquake. And we were trained on understanding the victims. What I noticed in working in the field was that if you lose your loved ones, this is a big incident for us. While we were listening to them, we were highly affected. But when they share what they have been through, they think that it's very normal. In inverted commas, they're sort of professional in explaining what they have been through. But in the evening sessions, we try to find a way what they have been through. Actually, this is another dimension of trauma. And this is what we saw on the side of young people. There were young people, there were children, there were adults. If we would face that kind of a situation, how should we behave? How should we react? Are there any more questions? Yes, distinguished professors, we have received 2 good questions. Let me ask my questions too. And the hardest duty will be on your shoulder. I will ask you to answer very shortly. So he left at a very great place. So while I was listening to you, I noticed the fact that individual well-being can be described by the person himself, herself. This is very much dependent on your habits. This is very much dependent on your experiences. Knowingly or unknowingly. Is there an ideal in inverted commas? So is there an ideal way of expressing your sorrow, your pain? I mean, should we tell them that? Should we shake them by their shoulders and say that, I mean, you should cry? And when I was together with my French colleagues, people were saying that the experts were saying that, I mean, why are you listening to sad songs? I mean, this is actually in our cultural codes, and the French colleagues were saying, why are you listening to sad songs if you're feeling sad? Why are you aggravating your situation? What is your approach to that? Trauma is equal to resilience. Is it what it is? So difficulties in trauma can be described in a very grave way, maybe remembered very difficult things. Before the occurrence of trauma, there's this thing called comfort zone. Should we try to go out of our comfort zone so that we can be pre-trained before the occurrence of the trauma, so that we would be more resilient? Would we be better trained? So how do you consider comfort zone? Do you have a romantic approach toward comfort zone? So these are the 4 questions from us. So I am now bad cop. Now I'm going to conclude my remarks by saying that you have to be on time. Michael, are you ready to start?
Because you are also trying. Please.
I'll just be very, very brief. I'm not going to try all 4 of those questions. What I will say is our research shows that there are multiple pathways to recovery and resilience. We see very distinct, culturally distinct patterns, and that is the negotiation with each context. I'll also just simply say that when I consult with governments about this issue that this gentleman raised about the pushback against resettlement, whether that's in the United States, Canada, or here in Europe, what we consistently see is the misunderstanding that you only focus on the psychological aspects of the population. You also have to think about the other co-occurring systems, housing, education. In other words, if you were to integrate those children into the education system, you're very likely to create a catalyst of change that then permeates from the children to the parents to the politicians. We think too simplistically about singular solutions and we don't get any changes. So I'll pass it.
Merhabalar, benim en önemli benim açımdan benim cevaplayabileceğimi düşündüğüm en önemli soru tek yolu var mı travmalarla baş etmenin? Kesinlikle yok. Zaten hani o travmalarla baş etme sürecinde kişinin güçlerine, kişinin güçlü yanlarına ve baş etme mekanizmalarına destek vermek çok önemli ve özellikle de travmanın akut döneminde tabii ki de yani hani travmayı hiç yokmuş gibi yaşayan ve böyle duygusal olarak hiç bunu belli etmeyen bir insana bir noktada bunu kolaylaştırıcı bir imkan sağlanabilir ama özellikle akut dönemde birçok insan kendilerini o sırada en sağlam durmalarını sağlayacak şekilde reaksiyon veriyorlar. Dolayısıyla hani benim için doğru olan travma yanıtı herkes için doğrudur ve insanları hepsini o şekle dönüştürelim diye bir şey kesinlikle yok. Yani diğer konu aynı zamanda hani mikro travmaların veya küçük konfor zonundan çıkmaların insanları özellikle çocukları geliştirdiği bir gerçek. O yüzden şu anda en çok eleştirilen konulardan bir tanesi bu helikopter annelik babalık denilen çocuğun bütün sorunlarının anında çözüldüğü. Tabii ki de ben kendi çocuklarımın Almanya'ya geçmelerini bir travma olarak görmedim. Tam tersine baş edilebilir bir zorluk olarak umarım ki onları ileride yaşayacakları zorluklara dayanıklılık kazandıran bir şey olarak gördüm. Bir Suriyelinin gemiyle kaçması tabii ki de buna karşılık bir travma. Sizin dediğinizle ilgili şöyle bir şeyim var ama bunu kanıtlayacak bir sosyal araştırmam yok açıkçası. Sanıyorum ki insanlar kendilerini güvende hissetmedikleri ölçüde empatide zorlanıyorlar. Yani Almanya'nın da zamanında o çok yaptığı, insanları tamamen başkalaştırdığı dönemde kendi içinde çok ciddi ve sosyal ve ekonomik güçlükler içinde olduğunu biliyoruz. Ama bunu yani hani birebir anlatacak bildiğim bir şey yok. Bilimsel referans şu anda söyleyemem. Ama tabii yani hani insanların kendi zorlukları içinde diğer insanların zorluklarını anlamakta zorlandığını düşünüyorum ama bu gitgide kabul edilebilir ve daha da büyüyen iki ayrılmaya gidebiliyor. Buna müdahale edilmediği sürece. O yüzden bu çok önemli bir konu gerçekten.
Teşekkürler hocam. Sizden de bir iki cümle alayım.
Çok zamanımızı çok açtığımızın farkındayım. Bahsettiğiniz konu sahada çok görülen, her bölgede görülen aslında ne olmuş oluyor? Orada duygu, düşünce, anlatım, bedenin tepkisi hepsi ayrışmış vaziyette. Dolayısıyla böyle bir sanki onu yaşamamış bir hava durumu anlatır gibi insanın çok sakin kalarak anlatması aslında olaya ait birçok parçanın bir arada henüz olmadığını bize gösteriyor. Ve bu çok beklenen bir şey. Bu zaman içinde belki ve daha güvenli bir terapötik alanda belki yavaş yavaş kişi gerçekten ne yaşadı? Çünkü onların izleri bedeninde var. Fakat belki başka zamanlarda onlar ortaya çıkıyor. Henüz bir entegrasyon olmamış demek. Dolayısıyla onu öyle bırakmak, yani öyle açıklamak anlamlı gelir. Sizin dediğiniz kısma da bu kutuplaştırıcı ortamda sanırım doğru bilgilendirme, yani benim tarafından bakabileceğim şey doğru bilgilendirme olmadığı sürece bu kutuplaşma, fraksiyonlar ve herkesin birbirine suçlayıcı yaklaşımı ve insanlaştırmanın dışına, yani insan dışı görmek oluyor. Çocuğun okula gitmemesi, benim çocuğuma hak olan şey onun çocuğuna hak değildir, değil mi? Bu bir insan dışılaştırma ve çok şiddetle karşısında durmamız gereken bir nokta. Son cümle olarak da sizin söylediğinize regüle kaldığımız sürece, regüle kalmayı becerebildiğimiz sürece alanımız, konfor alanının dışına çıkmak çok önemli. Ama disregüle olarak konfor alanının dışında olmak değil. Yani regüleyi arttırarak aslında konfor alanını genişletmekten bahsediyoruz. O yüzden o regülasyonu hep tutarak.
Benim bir tek bir eklemem olabilir.
Evet, belki bir cümle lütfen. Evet, çok uzattık.
Benim tek bir eklemem olacak. Deprem bölgesinde çalışırken aslında biz bir de şunu da çok fark ediyoruz. Ersin'in dediğine bir tek bir ekleme yapacağım. Depremi yaşayanlar normalleşme ile normalleşmeme arasında ince bir çizgide kalmış durumdalar. Bir arafta kalmış durumdalar. Yani şöyle diyorlar ki biz aslında evet bir taraftan bir çağrılar var. Yerel kurumlarla da konuştuğumuz üzere buradaki normalleşmenin ve tekrar o recovery'nin, toparlanmanın sağlanabilmesi için her şeyin eskiye dönmesi gerekiyor ve bunu da işte ekonomik faaliyetlerle, işte teşviklerle vesaire, eğitimin tekrar yüzde dönmesiyle bu gibi şeylerle olacak. Bu böyle şeylerle normalleşebileceğiz. Akabinde bir hafta sonra bir sel felaketi oluyor ve diyorlar ki hayır biz normal değiliz şu an, biz normalleşemeyiz bu şartlar altında. Çünkü en basit sosyal haklara, en basit temel ihtiyaçlara bu insanlar şu an bile ulaşamıyor. Konteynerler su altında en basitinden. Şimdi durum böyleyken bizim bir gönüllü arkadaşımızın sadece kendini iyi hissetmesi için Hatay'da olup da kendini daha yani daha psikolojik olarak kendini iyi hissetmesi için bir haftalığına izne çıkıp bir yere gitmesi kızın üzerinde gerçekten bir baskı yaratıyor ve diyor ki ben Instagram'dan bütün her şeyimi engelleyeyim ki insanlar hani orada diğer depremi yaşamış olan eşim, dostum, komşularım benim burada olduğumu bilmesin. Çünkü ben normalleşmiş oluyorum onun gözünde. Ama o normalleşmek istemiyor belki. Bizim aslında en temel yani sahada gördüğümüz kadarıyla şu ana kadar 7 aydır gördüğümüz en azından şu akut dönem geçtikten sonra bu 1-2 senelik toparlanma sürecinde normalleşelim mi normalleşmeyelim mi arada kalmış da olacak gibi. Çok teşekkür ederim.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum katkıları için. Çok isterdik devam edebilmek ama çok ziyadesiyle uzattık. Ayağınıza sağlık, emeğinize sağlık, dilinize sağlık. Ama en çok teşekkürü gerçekten gizli kahramanlar, kıymetli çevirmenler sizlere çok teşekkür ediyorum. Mahcubuz sizlere ama bunu söylerken de çevirmek zorunda kalıyorsunuz. Öyle de bir dilemması var işte. Size de...